Okay, I've in a previous video had described the new forms feature, and here I just wanted to dive down a little bit into form actions. Forms, like if you have a form on a page, and I've inserted just a simple little email address message text form into this home page, right? And then let me see, I need to actually get about me. That's where I want to go. I just need to grab this URL. I wasn't sure what it was, and I want to change the form to redirect to this page. It should work. Okay, so the form actions are pretty powerful in this. Basically, you can tell a form to do anything you want it to do, and I've included 3 form actions in the system as a default, of course, if we ever put this into Composer or whatever, I'm going to have to build migration stuff for all this, but be that as it may, it's just going to be bundled into the standalone install package where you basically set the application up and run with it from a zip file. But anyway, so I have 3 basic form actions. And a form action is what happens after the form is submitted. There's some default stuff that happens to start with. Number 1 is everything that's submitted to a form in this system using this form system is, of course, you can see all these tests, right, that I've done here. As I was testing and building out this stuff, I had to create a bazillion submissions basically to get it all to work right. But that's my typical kind of, almost trial and error sort of slow growth development pattern. It's test, 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 test. But anyway, so all form submissions are stuck into, the form submissions table. And the form submissions are put into there in a, with the results of the form in a JSON object, right? Well, the JSON object, you could do some basic reporting and searching and stuff through this form submission if you needed to. But you might need to go further. You might need to put that in a table. So I've got under my form actions, I have these basic operations that are just in here that are going to be part of it. And of course you can program and add as many actions as you need to the system. And they're not that complicated to create. I mean, it requires somebody with a little bit of knowledge of Yii, and depending on what you have to do, maybe a lot of knowledge of Yii, depending on how complicated your task is, and some PHP experience, understanding how object-oriented programming and classes and that sort of thing work. But they do work. This one, for instance, it just sends an email notice to admins, right? And the only this actual action can send to either a user ID, a role, or if you have lists enabled, to every member of a list or every member of a certain role. You can send an email of the submission of the form. And it's done in real time when the form is submitted. The other one I have, the other 2 I have are, if this thing will get back to where it's supposed to go, here we are, store the submissions in a table, right? And if we look at this, every time I turn this Captiva software on, it just slows my machine down like crazy. I guess it's just a memory hog. But anyway, it stores submission in a table, and it takes the JSON object submission and it builds a table from it if the table doesn't exist based on this table name, right? You're not allowed to overwrite a table. And if the table is the only table that I let you write to that's in the system are the contacts or user profile. Of course, you could get in here and yank that around, and like if you got into my submission controller, you could get it to override that. But I think as a safety thing, these two things, the contacts and the user profile, aren't part of the auth system. You don't want to go writing to the user table because you could seriously screw up your authentication tables and stuff by doing that. So, and you don't want to, have people submit stuff to Pages or any of the other tables that are in the back end. But it lets you submit a table, to a table. Now, I don't have any tools to let you get to that table and build reports on it or view it. That's up to you. If you're going to build custom tables, you need to have your own reporting tools. I use actually this little, let me see if I can get this guy down to where you can see it. I just use this little thing called Adminer that you can get. It's a free, and it's a full SQL tool, similar to PHP MyAdmin. It installs in a folder, and you can access your tables and database with it. Back to forms. Okay, so here, if I needed to change that table name, I could just come in here. Now, one thing this thing needs is something more elegant here to edit parameters. I need to build a little parameter editor, that lets you change or add value pairs without having to understand how to read JSON. But for now, this is just how it is. And, it's not that difficult to read. Right here it just says table name and then custom table. It's got a semicolon between it. And if you had more value pairs, they would have a comma between those value pairs. They have to be wrapped in quotes and surrounded by curly braces. That is a JSON object. But anyway, so what happens is it takes the JSON object and it builds a table from it if it doesn't exist, and then the submission then puts the values of the value pairs that are in the submission into that table. So once the table is built, it happens one time, subsequent submissions go into the table. Of course, you have to be careful with this because once that table's built, if you were to go to the form and then change the values in the form, change the fields or add fields, you'd kind of be screwed. It would if you change the name of the fields, it's not going to add them. If you remove a field, it'll probably cause a fatal PHP error. I haven't error trapped that function to prevent that kind of thing from happening, and anyone that wants to use this in an enterprise at an enterprise level probably needs to go in and do try catches and make that thing a little bit more bulletproof than I have. But it works, so you can, under the form actions, you have a couple things you can do here. You can, like I said, email to either a role, a user ID, or a list. You can store the submissions in a table of your choosing, and then you can do whatever kind of reporting you need to do. You could create surveys with this thing just fine, and then do reporting on your surveys. Export that table, bring it into your local reporting stuff in your desktop, and run whatever kind of reports you want to off of it. Here you can, of course, store a new member contact. What this one does is it takes a submission of a form, hoping it has, of course, this is requiring that it has an email field, and then it forwards the person on to a download file and creates a download link for them, right? Those are three very, very common things that people need to do in websites all the time. They need to email the contents of form, they need to store it in a table, and they need to present some kind of custom data to a user based on, they've given you their information, that you need to send them on to some goodie. In this case, it's a download file. And the download file I have is basically, the example is simply a PDF that is instructions on how to use the form editor here. But that'll get you started. And you can see here what happens if I, whoops. Well, first of all, I need to go ahead and change my form. Forms. I need to edit this form. I want to send this to About Me. Since that page doesn't, that install it page doesn't exist on my local instance. Oh, there's a bug here. These things are interfering with the update button, the validation. Watch what happens. Update. Please enter. I got to put something in the form. And if I hit update again, it's going to tell me that it's trying to force me to validate this guy. So there's a conflict between the validation in the form editor and the actual update button on the deal. So that's a fix for somebody. I'm not going to mess with it. I know how to get around it. You just fill the form in, hit the update button. So there we have it. Now if I go back to my home page, I've inserted the form in the page. That's covered in another video. There's the form. I'm going to say test2test.com, and I'm going to pour this stuff in here in the message text. Say submit. Data truncated, too long for message column. Okay, I need to harden this a little more because I think I've told that it had 200. I would allow 256 characters. So I need to change that. But I'm going to go back and just resubmit the form. So I have some little bit of bug fixing to do before I can, I need to harden that thing so that it doesn't give you that kind of a fatal error on a submit. So we'll just put in a couple of things here. I think it's field is limited to 256 characters is what's going on. Okay, so it submitted the form and then it sent me to the About Me page. So it did the redirect that I wanted it to do just fine. And if I go here and look under this deal, and let me get this down to where we can look at it. There is the submission I just made, right? So it all works. So there we have it. You now have the ability to build forms at will and also make them do basically anything you want them to do. I think we're done.